So go ahead and download that East Charles infill patch. Let's examine what's there. I have a few things. So what the anatomy of this thing is a portion of a CAD mapper file, which has all of these layers intact. Curved existing buildings, new buildings, topography, and layer 0. I have painted the topography pink. You'll find out why in a little bit. It is a way of allowing the aerial to be somewhat diagrammatic as well as illustrative. But the meat and the bones of this particular model are the existing buildings, and then these new components which are brought in. So these are brought in as components, each block with trees, and so it makes this go a little bit faster if you're able to work on an individual block with trees and the buildings and the like. So those are basically a few blocks. I think they've been exploded. No, they're not. Yeah. Okay. So they are still components. These existing buildings are on their own layer, which is one great thing about working with CAD Mapper is that existing buildings do come in as groups and come in on a particular layer. So you want to decide now at this point if you're using these existing buildings or if you are going to merge that into a Google Earth view in the three-dimensional view like so. So you have to make a decision now. So assuming that we're going to cut out a piece of the land and insert this new view of this SketchUp model, how much of this view are we going to use? How much are we going to let the model communicate? So we could conceivably, the decisions we have to make here are we could basically just use this model view that has buildings that are nearby and incorporate the whole thing and just paste it on top. Or we could, using some SketchUp finesse and some Photoshop finesse, successfully merge this particular view in and around, in between buildings. This is tricky because a few things are at play here. Normally, we'd be able to export our SketchUp model if it's properly geolocated and everything would just appear. The problem is when you're working with an urban area, you might want to move around things, you may want to tear down some things. Not everything is conveniently going to merge in with your proposed SketchUp model. A lot of these trees basically in this particular Google Earth model are solids, and so even setting a building in here gets a little bit messy because it starts to merge with the trees. So you'll notice some of the aerial photography that's out there, not aerial photography, but aerial renderings that are out there, particularly from landscape architects like Rundell Ernstberger and things like that. They're starting to render or place their renderings in the context directly from this 2016 imagery. And so that's what we're going to attempt to do here today. So I've got Google Earth open and I'm pulling out, looking at this particular angle here, and I've got the SketchUp model, and I want to rotate that there. And I want to just layer them over together like this, and just kind of continue to rotate this model until I think it's very close to the perspectival lines that we're seeing here on Madison Street and Adams Street. This is not terribly easy, but again, it can work because we're dealing with similar perspectival lines, and we're just doing our best to try to get that as close to what we're seeing in the Google Earth. So I'm just using the orbit tool here in a smaller window and just trying to rotate the model until I think it's going to be as close as possible. We have some Photoshop tools at our disposal that we can also use to skew and distort this further. The second variable to consider, first of all, I have two SketchUp models open here. Are we using these existing buildings or not? At this point, I'm going to go for it and just say that we explode this whole thing, explode. Now these are individual groups. We can get rid of the existing buildings We're going to try to merge them in. And you notice that the axes are turned on, so I have to go to View and turn off the axes. And what I'll do then is just get the window a little bit small and try to rotate it until I think it could potentially fit into the Google Earth view. And so I think making it small like this can work. And you're just looking for the line here on that Madison Street side, and you're looking at the line of that Charles Street side, and just getting the model to a point where we think that it's pretty close, and then we can get that ready for export. We have some Photoshop tools that we will use to merge it, to work with it a little bit further. Then, once I have the view that I want in Google Earth, we'll go to File, Save Image. And here we have these map options. I want to turn off everything, unless we want the compass, but turn off the title and description, turn off the legend, turn off the scale, turn that all off. And then we have some options for the maximum resolution of our Google Earth image. I'm going to choose the maximum, which is 4,800 pixels, and then save the image. Give that a name. Save it to your desktop. So that's saved. And when we think we have, what I've done is just, like I said, minimize the model down until we think we've got a comparative view that is as close to these perspectival lines as possible. Get that in there. And then prepare that for export. So, some other variables to consider: the shadows. There are several variables here in terms of how the shadows are used. On faces, on ground, and on edges, you'll notice the shadows are quite different when we have those turned on, depending on the time and the date. You'll notice that shadows vary greatly when you vary the date or time. Most of our Google Earth imagery is indicative of a certain time of day. If we look at where the shadows are hitting, right, so the health clinic is here and it's casting towards the northeast. Chances are that it's past noon, and based on foliage, it's either early spring, okay, because foliage is pretty full, right? The trees aren't dead by any means. So they've chosen to do this aerial imagery in probably mid-spring, just after noon, okay? So probably 1 o'clock. Well, we would probably like our shadows to be similar, would we not? Yes? Perhaps. So I'm going to switch this to March, April, and then get it into just after noon. If your model is correct, the shadows should be similar. Question is the model correct? So we don't want different shadows from the Sketchup model, completely different than what we're seeing in Google Earth. We want shadows that are similar. So I'll adjust this a little bit and just get them into a position that is comparable. We then have these variables. We have on faces, on ground. I'm just going to use on faces. I think that's appropriate. And get this ready for export. It's now ready for export. So we go to export, 2D graphic. How big of an image should we go for based on our Google Earth image? How big of an image should we go for? If our Google Earth image was 4,800 wide, what should we go for here? It's a trick question.
Similar?
Yes, something similar. How about something exact? Okay, so under export options, let's go for this is going to be a PNG file because we want to preserve the transparency around the model. Let's go for something that's 4,800 pixels high. Click OK, give it a name. It is a PNG, it is 4,800 pixels wide, and export that. But in doubt, just go for the exact same number, 4,800 pixels wide. Okay, and you can minimize Sketchup and bring it up to a
It did not ask me for like pixels.
Okay, so go to export 2D graphic and then click on the options.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah.
Okay. That's my example, so I'll close that out. So we'll open. Open our base map. That is a JPEG. I'm going to double click on the background layer, make it layer 0, so that's now editable. And then I'm going to duplicate it right away. Duplicate that layer right away. That way we've got a reference layer and we've got a working layer. Got a reference layer and a working layer, so there's 2 copies of this base image for us to work with. I'm also going to think about making this a little bit less pronounced, so I'm going to make a new layer here and dump some white paint on it. So here's a new layer. It's just going to be a layer of white paint. And the paint bucket tool is embedded with the gradient tool in Photoshop. So I'm just going to put a layer of white paint there and turn down the opacity just to make the base image a little bit milky. There's a lot of detail in there, there's a lot of contrast in there. So I really am more interested in the impact of our SketchUp drawing, of our development. So I'm going to turn that opacity down. This is very similar to what we did in Module 2 when we worked with Google Earth imagery of this nature. So I'm going to turn that opacity down. I'm going to highlight these 2 layers. We do that by holding down the Shift key. I can select multiple layers, do a Control click or right mouse click, and we can merge those 2 layers. So there's a white paint layer and there's a reference layer. Go ahead and do that. All right, now we're going to cut out a mask. We're going to play peekaboo now. We've got our white paint layer on top of our reference layer. So I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to cut away a hole for our new development to peek through. So I'm going to cut around this pavilion. the medical building in the foreground. Assume that everything else can peek through. This is going to allow our development to peek through this layer, so I'm going to delete that away. Yes. No. And I need to erase it. That deletes this portion away. So you can see the reference layer peeking underneath. Deselect. Now I'm ready to place my new layer of stuff. So I'll go to place embedded. Look for my PNG, which is my East Charles patch. Looks like that. It's already the same size. So it comes in something like that. And we can size it close to what we're seeing. I can rotate it in, I can gently size it. Looks like I need to rotate it slightly. Gently size it like so. And then I want to control click or right mouse click. I want to rasterize that layer and then set it in between. So we can see our development peeking through here. Peeking through. Like so. It's not quite there yet, but you can see it peeking through. This white paint layer, I will decrease its opacity again so we can see our work below. And I'll make this one active layer again. And then there are other tools here under Transform that include Scale, Rotate, Skew, Distort, Perspective, and Warp. All of these tools can help manipulate this patch in order to make it look more fitting for our particular view here. So the perspective tool is an example. I grab the corners like so, and you can see it changes the perspectival vanishing of our patch. We have to click return in order to accept that change. The skew tool is quite powerful. I can grab the corners, and as you can see, I can pull the whole patch in a certain direction or push this corner down, and we can see that it's looking more and more like it belongs there. And we push these corners and kind of put it in there. So this is now 3 layers. We've got a white paint layer, we've got an infill patch, and we've got a reference layer behind it. So the white paint layer, I'll turn that back up, and we can see our development peeking through like so. Okay. Now, that's very loud. That's very noticeable, right? It's a very strange pink, but it blurs the line between representative and diagrammatic. There's a lot of detail and a lot of material in this context. You want your viewer to focus on your proposal. So this is a way of using a color scheme or a diagrammatic form of color to draw attention to your development and have it really be noticed in a presentation or on the board. It's very similar to the sort of diagrammatic nature that we used in Module 2 when we used the color cells when we were highlighting land use. So this aerial photograph, this aerial rendering will be very much in family with your work from Module 2 in which you were showing the different land uses from probably a similar position. Okay? So this would fall in very nicely into your PowerPoint, into your final board, and into your final portfolio pages because it probably is very a very similar angle from that land use diagram that you completed in Module 2. And maybe it uses some form of color as a way of really hammering the idea that you are doing infill change to a portion of the urban fabric here. But this also allows us to perhaps cover up some significant stuff that is in that foreground or in the middle ground, just to highlight our proposed development in concert with some existing elements that may be around it. Okay. When I do Photoshop work, I always save a PSD. A PSD file will save everything in its layer structure. Okay? It's a big file, but it's necessary because it will keep these layers intact. Okay? You can save it as a PSD or as a TIFF, but PSD is a Photoshop file that is open only in Photoshop from that point forward. You notice I have the layers selected here, so it keeps the layers and the layer structure in case I want to come back to this at a later time and add more things to it or take things away. To take it into a presentation, I will save a copy of it. Save as. I'll turn off the layers and it will default it to as a copy. And then I can save it as a PNG or a JPEG to insert it into a PowerPoint or insert it into InDesign, into your portfolio pages or a final report, which we will cover InDesign when we come back from Thanksgiving. So very important when you're doing anything with Photoshop, always save a version that has the layers intact, and then save a flattened JPEG or PNG that will flatten the layers and have it ready to insert into a PowerPoint or a document. So that Photoshop will automatically put copy into the file name just to help you manage your files effectively. So that's saved. Other things we can do to this, we go back into the layers, we've got the white paint layer. There may be things protruding that you may want to erase. There may be elements in the foreground, there may be things protruding. There may be a little bit more that you want to erase away. The erasing tool is basically a paintbrush in Photoshop, so you select the size and the hardness of that, as well as the smoothing and flow. There's all kinds of different variations to the brushes. But the eraser tool in Photoshop basically becomes a paintbrush. And so you can get in here, and if you need to clear out some room for your trees or something like that, you can see I'm basically erasing away part of the white paint layer to allow those trees to pop up. Other variations, Other variations to this, if the hot pink is too distracting, one advantage of having this hot pink is that it's isolatable. So I will go to select color range, grab the hot pink, turn the fuzziness all the way up, and it will select all of the hot pink. Try that again actually, select color range, hot pink. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. Turn down for a little bit. Up. And just isolate that. So if you're not comfortable with the hot pink, if you want some of the context to show through it, we can isolate it even at this point. You can see it's selecting part of the trees, so it can get a little messy in there, but this is just another way of being able to isolate and cut this pink out. So I will cut and put that on its own layer now. And then one of my favorite tools in Photoshop is Paste in Place. Under Paste Special, Edit Paste Special, Paste in Place, it puts it right back where it was. Now you can see I can turn down the opacity of the pink. That's just in case if I want some of the context to look like it's showing through. In this case, it is the parking lot of the health clinic. I've got the cultural trail running through here, So that's a primary element of this little model. But if you want this portion of this context to show through, this is a way that you can do it while still using these hot colors, this T-Mobile pink that I like to call it. I just turned down the opacity of that. It is on its own layer now, so I can also use blending options, blend mode, multiply, and that will basically layer a cell, layer the color as a cell on top of that. And so it has more of a translucent feel to it. And is again in concert with your previous diagrammatic work from Module 2, which was dealing with colors, land use colors, layered over individual buildings. So now this rendering is very much in concert with that aesthetic that you established in your Module 2 work. So as we start to piece the different parts of the semester together, your rendering tools here can work very well with the diagrams that you've already included in previous modules as you form this unified presentation for the end of the semester. So though that covers a lot of great Photoshop tricks, as well as some layer management and things like that, as well as a perspectival way of inserting this development proposal in and around an area that might have some existing buildings very close to it, and in a complex urban environment. Greenfield planning, of course, we can insert it into Google Earth, it looks pretty good. But when you're inserting buildings into an urban environment like this type of diagrammatic information, as well as this tool of kind of inserting this view into this peekaboo cutout, allows us to take our SketchUp work and show it in a more complex context. Okay?
We already have all the landscaping elements and stuff like that done in SketchUp. Do we have to have like a very bright plain like this, or can we just put our? Okay.
Yeah, just use what you have. It's just, this is a way of saying, look at me, here is my proposed development in a complex context. So it is a graphic design kind of idea to show it in, but it's not necessary. The peekaboo idea works either way, because you're basically just inserting your model underneath that hole, and it shows up.
Yeah, especially for everything else
Exactly.
is white.
Right. Okay, so that completes the exercise. Okay. So I hope that'll give you some information for your aerial renderings for the module and for the end of the semester. Okay.